For centuries, execution wasn't simply about killing someone. It was about punishment. Governments designed methods intended to frighten the public, humiliate the condemned, and make death itself part of the sentence. Some methods were so brutal that even societies that once used them eventually decided they had gone too far. Humans spent centuries inventing ways to ensure death was never quick. Out of all the brutal methods history has scrubbed from the law books today, we're walking through these 5 absolute peak of human cruelty, designed not just to kill, but to break a person's mind and body before they ever took their final breath. And the reasons they disappeared. Most documented and chilling forms of punishment that once ruled the American frontier. Ready? Because the version of the West you're about to hear is not the one Hollywood sold you. Punishment 1, instant hanging without a trial. The quickest death sentence the frontier ever invented. No courtroom, no lawyer, no chance to speak. On the open range, a single accusation was frequently all it took. True or false didn't matter. The rope finished the argument. Most of the people who swung never got the chance to prove they were innocent. The entire process, from accusation to death, often lasted under 60 minutes. The drop itself took only seconds. Judge Isaac C. Parker, remembered forever as the hanging judge, handed down 160 death sentences in Indian Territory. 79 of those men actually died on the gallows. Parker wasn't driven by cruelty for its own sake. He was trying to impose some kind of order in a place where formal law barely existed. Still, the boundary between order and pure brutality was as thin as the hemp that stretched under a man's weight. The man who actually dropped the trapdoors for decades was George Malladin, nicknamed the Prince of Hangmen. Over more than 20 years, he oversaw at least 60 executions. He prepared every rope himself, soaking it, drying it, soaping it, so the neck would break cleanly. One of his favorite lengths of rope was used on 11 different men. He took pride in that fact. Hanging wasn't only punishment, it was public entertainment. When the conspirators in Lincoln's assassination were executed in 1865, thousands of people applied for tickets. Only soldiers and officials were allowed inside. Outside the walls, crowds packed the streets and trains arrived full of spectators. That single day of death became the most attended public event in the entire United States. Not every hanging went smoothly. When Blackjack Ketchum dropped in 1901, the rope was the wrong length. Instead of breaking his neck, the force tore his head clean off. Hangmen eventually developed careful formulas based on a man's weight to calculate the right drop. Mistakes still happened, and every mistake was fatal one way or another. These public hangings turned into social occasions. Whole families brought their children. Vendors sold food and drinks around the scaffold. Watching a man die became Sunday amusement and a blunt warning to the rest of the town. Break the rules and the rope is waiting for you. Even the paperwork had a price. A court record from Santa Fe in 1849 shows that one execution cost more than $110, roughly $4,500 in today's money. That covered the rope, the lumber for the gallows, the hangman's fee, and the prisoner's final meals. Death itself was a line item in the budget. Sometimes the rope failed. The notorious Texas outlaw Bill Longley was strung up by vigilantes for horse theft. The rope broke, and he walked away. His survival was only temporary. In 1878, the state of Texas finished the job properly. The frontier rarely forgot. It only postponed. Old records from Arkansas in 1875 describe the ideal gallows in careful detail. A platform 6.5 feet high, a beam a foot wide, and even a slanted roof in case of rain. The roof wasn't for the condemned man. It was for the spectators. In that world, the comfort of the living mattered more than the dignity of the dying. When a hanging went wrong, the result was slow and horrifying. The man strangled for long minutes while the crowd stared. A later San Quentin warden named Clinton Duffy called these botched jobs dirty hangings. Efficiency was never guaranteed on the frontier, and hanging was only the beginning. Punishment 2, mass lynching, when the crowd itself became the court. Unlike the hangings that at least pretended to carry official authority, lynching was raw mob violence. No trial, no defense, just an angry group choosing a victim and acting. Between 1882 and 1968, roughly 4,742 people were lynched in America. Almost no one was ever punished for it. Montana still holds the grim record for the bloodiest wave of vigilante killings. Between 1863 and 1865, hundreds of suspected horse thieves were hunted down and killed by organized mobs. Texas, California, and the Deep South were permanent hotspots. Wherever the formal state was weak, the rope and the gun took over. Innocence was optional. In Tombstone, Arizona, in 1884, a man named John Heath was dragged out of jail by a crowd and hanged in the public square. He was only suspected of involvement in a deadly robbery. Hard evidence was never required. The mob simply needed a body swinging. Age offered no protection. 15-year-old Francisco Cota was accused in Los Angeles of killing a woman. A crowd dragged him down Alameda Street, stabbing him as they went. Before he could die from the wounds, they hanged him, only a few blocks from the sheriff's office. No one stepped in to stop it. The word lynching itself traces back to Charles Lynch, an 18th century Virginia justice of the peace who practiced rough, extra-legal justice. The habit spread across the frontier as the preferred answer for cattle thieves, horse thieves, and anyone the community simply disliked. A rumor was often enough to seal a man's fate. The practice eventually drew international condemnation. Foreign governments protested when their own citizens were lynched on American soil. Between 1887 and 1903, the U.S. State Department paid out $480,000 in reparations to China, Italy, Britain, and Mexico. A nation that claimed to stand for liberty was paying blood money for the actions of its mobs. Consequences were rare. In 1915, the Leon brothers were lynched in Pima County over suspected horse theft. Two deputies, Robert Fenton and Frank Moore, were actually convicted of second-degree murder and given long sentences. 2 years later, the governor pardoned them on his way out of office. Justice arrived and left with the same speed. Some lynchings were pure business. During the Johnson County War in the 1890s, wealthy Wyoming cattlemen hired gunmen to lynch small settlers who competed for land. Money bought the rope and chose the target. Economic power decided who lived and who died. The true death toll will never be known. Official counts leave out private murders, bodies that were never found, and names that were never written down. Every statistic hides hundreds of anonymous graves. The frontier buried its secrets with its victims. The selection of victims was never random. Mexicans, Chinese immigrants, and Native Americans were hit far harder than their numbers would suggest. Researchers estimate that 597 Mexicans alone were lynched between 1848 and 1928. For generations, those numbers were quietly left out of the official story. The frontier did not kill evenly, it chose carefully. Punishment 3, scalping, cutting the skin and hair from a living or dead head. This was one of the most visceral practices of the frontier. It occurred in wars between native nations and was also practiced by American settlers and soldiers who collected official bounties for scalps as proof of a kill. The cruelty was shared. Governments on both sides of the border paid for scalps. Men, women, and children all carried a cash value. An Irishman named James Kirker organized bands of mercenaries who hunted Apaches for the bounties. In the 1830s and 1840s, his groups brought in hundreds of scalps. Killing became a paid profession. The money was so good that fraud followed. Scalps taken from Mexicans and mixed-race people were sold as Apache trophies. No one checked the origin. A scalp was a scalp and the payment was the same. Where governments offered cash for body parts, someone was always willing to supply them. Scalping was also psychological warfare. Killing was not enough. The trophy had to be displayed, hung on poles, worn as decoration, or turned into authorities as proof. Every scalp on display told the surviving communities the same message. Nowhere is safe and no one is protected. At the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, U.S. soldiers collected scalps and other body parts as souvenirs. Some were later shown in a Denver theater to cheering crowds. What we would call a war crime today was treated as public entertainment. As settlement advanced, the practice slowly declined. The trauma, the lost land, and the cultural wounds lasted generations. Scalping was never just a punishment. It was one chapter in a larger process of stripping people of their humanity during the conquest of the West. Few written records survive, not because it was rare, but because recording it was dangerous. The accounts that do exist destroy any remaining romantic picture of the frontier. It was not a place of simple heroes. It was a place where cruelty had no limits and belonged to every side.